Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour on GB News. The cost of living crisis. What does it mean for you? We'll be speaking to a Conservative MP, John Penrose, on how to stop bill costs getting out of hand and what more the government should be doing. Russia's deployed what it calls peacekeepers to Kazakhstan to deal with protesters there. Could it turn into another Ukraine? And 1 year on from the attack on the Capitol building, President Biden's been speaking in the last hour. We'll be discussing the state of American democracy. That and so much more over the next hour between 3 and 4. But first, here's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date on GB News at 3 o'clock. The government's sticking with plans to raise national insurance, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak saying ducking difficult decisions would not be responsible. Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg wants the move to be scrapped, arguing the increase can't be justified as families struggle with surging food and energy costs. From April, national insurance is set to rise by 1.25% to help the NHS and social care. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the decision was made collectively.
We think it's absolutely right that we do two things. One, clear up the very big backlog of operations and procedures that haven't been able to take place because the NHS has been so remarkably dealing with coronavirus. And two, make sure that we deal with the long-term problem of social care, and we're doing it through a rise in national insurance. That's the decision that we've made. We think we're making an important historic point here.
The Prime Minister has denied suggestions that the NHS doesn't have staff to cope with pressures brought on by the Omicron variant. His comments come as the number of hospital trusts on the highest level of alert increased to 24. They now fear priority services can't be safely delivered. More than 17,000 people are currently in hospital with COVID. That's the most since February last year.
Of course, I understand how frustrating it is to see another wave coming in, and I thank doctors, nurses, all health staff, everybody for what they're doing to keep going. What we are doing is increasing the support massively. So there are 5,000 more doctors this year than there were this time last year, 10,000 more nurses.
US President Joe Biden has called his predecessor Donald Trump a threat to democracy on the first anniversary of the Capitol Hill insurrection. 4 people died on the 6th of January last year, and 1 Capitol police officer died the day after defending Congress. The president addressed the nation earlier and said Donald Trump's web of lies about the 2020 election that drove the anger and madness of the attack have not been abated.
The former president of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest, and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution.
Survivors and relatives of the British tourists killed during the Tunisia beach terror attack have agreed a settlement with the travel operator TUI. 38 people, including 30 Britons, were killed at a hotel complex when a gunman stormed the beach. TUI agreed the undisclosed figure without admission of liability or fault. A gay rights activist involved in a cake row has been told by the European Court of Human Rights that his case is inadmissible. Gareth Lee claims he was discriminated against when the Christian owners of a bakery refused to make him a cake with the slogan "Support Gay Marriage" in 2014. He's now considering whether to bring a fresh court challenge under domestic law. The director of the Evangelical Alliance, Peter Linus, has welcomed the European Court's ruling.
It comes down to, can you force somebody against their political, religious, conscience, for any reason, can you force somebody to print a message they disagree with And the court said, no, you can't, for anybody, you can't force anybody against their will. And the European Court has now agreed with that. And I think that's ultimately a good decision, actually, for everybody. It's never been about Christians against the LGBT community.
The UK has condemned acts of violence in Kazakhstan, where there are reports of soldiers firing at protesters. Russia has sent paratroopers to the country following ongoing clashes. Police say dozens of rioters were killed yesterday, with state television reporting 13 members of the security force also died. 2 bodies were decapitated. The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, says the UK will coordinate with its allies on what action should be taken.
We are concerned by the violent clashes in Kazakhstan, and we're following developments very closely. Our thoughts are with those who have lost their lives in what has happened, and we condemn the acts of violence and destruction of property.
You are up to date here on GB News at 5 minutes past 3. I'll have the latest headlines for you at past, but right now, back to the briefing with Darren.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the briefing on this Thursday. We're talking about the cost of living crisis, drug laws, and later on the Capitol riots in Washington 1 year on. Whether you're watching us on TV or listening to us on the radio, a very good afternoon and welcome to the programme. Always keen to get your views, though, on the big stories of the day. Do get in touch. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GB News, and we'll get to some of your views a little later on in the programme, whether that's about anti-vaxxers, the cost of living, or indeed that attack on the Capitol building and the state of American democracy. But first, the Prime Minister has been visiting a vaccination centre in Northamptonshire, where he sent a pretty strong message for people who've been refusing the vaccine. Let's have a listen to Boris Johnson.
Vital importance of vaccination. And when you look at what's happening to patients coming into hospital, a large number of them, perhaps 40% of them, haven't actually been vaccinated at all. And that's increasingly true of people who go into to ICU, into intensive care. The large majority of them have not been vaccinated at all, and the overwhelming majority of them have not been boosted. And so at this stage, and I haven't said this before in this whole vaccination campaign, I just want to reach out to all those who have not been yet vaccinated and say it's a great thing. But I also want to say to the anti-vax campaigners, the people who are putting this mumbo-jumbo on social media, they are completely wrong. And you haven't heard me say that before, because I think it's important that we I want a voluntary approach in this country, and we're going to keep a voluntary approach. I believe in doing things through everybody working together and seeing the vital importance of vaccination. And we've got much higher rates of vaccination in this country thanks to that community-led voluntary approach. That's a wonderful thing. Other European countries are going for coercion. But what a tragedy that we've got all this pressure on the NHS, all the difficulties that our doctors and nurses are experiencing. And you've got people out there spouting complete nonsense about a vaccination. They are totally wrong. And I think it's time that government, call them out on what they're doing. It is absolutely wrong. It's totally counterproductive. And the stuff they're putting out on social media is complete mumbo-jumbo.
There you go, the Prime Minister speaking a little earlier on today. Well, another problem for Boris Johnson is the rising cost of living for families around the country. Boris Johnson's under pressure from some of his own MPs to slash VAT on energy bills, and it's now emerged there's even a cabinet rift after Jacob Rees-Mogg reportedly urged the Prime Minister to reverse the recent national insurance hike that's due to come into place in April. Well, yesterday, the Conservative MP, John Penrose, asked the Prime Minister about the cost of living crisis in the Commons, and he joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, John. First of all, do you agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg? He seemed to raise this in the Commons, that now is not a great time to be raising taxes, given rising inflation, particularly when it comes to energy?
Well, I'd make two comments. I think the first one is that you played earlier in your news clip a quote from, I think, Grant Shapps saying, look, this is a collective decision. So individual members of the cabinet will all have signed up to that one way or another. So they should be, all of them, on the same page on this, whatever their sort of initial starting points were. But also, I think that there's a broader point to make, which is that I'm a Tory and therefore I like lower taxes rather than higher ones. Absolutely right. But also, the Conservative Party stands for sound money, for not spending money that we don't have, and creating vast bills which our children and our grandchildren are going to have to pay for us in years to come. So you can't just run up the nation's credit card and spend money you haven't got. And both those two things, low taxes, but also not just running up debts. Both those things are important, and that's why if we're going to get rid of some of the huge backlogs that have built up in elective surgeries for hips and knees and things like that over the course of the the pandemic, if you're going to get through that backlog, then we are going to have to spend a bit more money in doing it. So I don't like the idea of higher taxes, and I voted for it with a slightly heavy heart when I did, but I can see it's necessary in the short term to get through that backlog. It's got to be done.
Well, of course, one of the things that might eat away at the government's debt is inflation, and it's going to reach very high levels this year, levels we've not seen for decades. A lot of people will have voted for Brexit and the Conservative Party in the hope that actually they may have seen tax cuts, particularly when it comes to VAT on energy bills. Is this something the government should genuinely be exploring?
Well, the point I was making in the Commons yesterday is that the major change in what's going on with our energy bills, it isn't being driven by VAT or green levies or these sorts of things. They're a factor, yes, but the really big change, the thing that's driving most of the pain for all of us and is going to get worse over the course of the next couple of months as well, is actually the increase in the international price of gas. And that's actually being driven by some decisions taken in Moscow because they stopped pumping as much gas. It all comes across to the rest of Europe in a series of pipelines, and that's driving up the international price. And ultimately, that means that it knocks through to British energy bills as well. And so the point I was making to the Prime Minister is, look, actually, in the medium term, you can fiddle around with schemes to do things with VAT or whatever, but it's not going to make a big difference, and it's not going to make a long-term difference. What we've actually got to do is to decouple ourselves, make ourselves independent from our reliance on this sort of European gas price, which is ultimately driven by decisions in Moscow. We've got to become much more self-sufficient in energy, so that no matter indeed people in other parts of the world, whatever decisions they take, those decisions don't matter to us because we've got our own resources here.
It is fascinating you touch upon Moscow there, and it is entirely possible in the coming weeks, depending what happens in Ukraine and indeed potentially in Kazakhstan, that there could be further sanctions against Moscow. There could be further limitations to their supply of energy to Europe. But in many ways, John, those are long-term things in terms of what you've been talking about sorting out. Many people are in a position now in which they're seeing the energy bills increase by 50% this year at a time when everything else is going up. Surely that is the stage at which the government, looks, of course, at long-term energy needs, but focuses on what needs to happen here and now.
Yeah, I don't think that we should say it's either or. Ministers may have to do something in the short term. That may be the wrong thing to do because it helps the rich disproportionately more than it helps the poor. But they may need to do something in the short term. The point I'm making is that what I'm worried about is that all the discussion, other than on programs like yours today, all the discussion so far has been about all these short-term issues. And ultimately, we've got to fix the long-term stuff. And we've got to start doing that today as well, because otherwise we're going to be in the same situation again this time next year when the cold weather comes. And actually, if we fix the long-term problem, then we won't have this recurring issue. And we will have dealt with a much bigger series of changes to the gas price and changes to our energy bills, and we'll be insulated against them forever. So we can't just do the short-term stuff. We've got to do both. We can't just ignore the longer-term things just because they aren't immediately the burning platform today.
Just very finally, John, while we've got you, just on energy supply from Moscow, Nord Stream 2, of course, is a big issue, particularly in Germany, that pipeline that is due to be switched on relatively soon. Do you think, given the political context, it would be a mistake for Germany to allow that to go ahead?
Well, I think Germany will have to make its own decisions, but of course, you are right to say that, that it will increase many people, not just Germany's, but many people's dependence on Russian gas. So Germany must make its own decisions for what's right for them. But from the British point of view, we need just to make sure that our energy bills here aren't being driven by what's happening to the price of gas in the rest of Europe. And that price of gas in the rest of Europe is being affected by decisions made in Moscow. So if we can get ourselves to be uncoupled from that, independent from that, not only will we be safer and more secure in the national security sense, but actually our energy bills will be permanently and sustainably lower, and that's going to be better for both households and for businesses too.
OK, John, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. That's the Conservative MP for Weston-super-Mare, John Penrose, joining us. Well, we've just been talking about Russia, haven't we? And Russian paratroops have arrived in Kazakhstan as part of what Russia claims is a peacekeeping mission. But Kazakhstan's president asked for the intervention from the Collective Security Treaty Organization on Wednesday. The request was swiftly approved by Moscow. It comes as violent clashes continue between protesters and the police and the army in Kazakhstan. And there is little reliable information on the number of casualties, but local news agencies quoted a spokesperson for police in the country's largest city saying that dozens of people were being killed during these attacks on government buildings. Well, joining me to discuss this is a lecturer in Russian politics at UCL, University College London, Natia Seskuria. Very good afternoon to you. First of all, just give us a sense of why these protests have started in Kazakhstan. It just seems, following on from our previous discussion, that it's largely down to rising energy prices there.
So the events have unfolded in Kazakhstan in the past couple of hours is definitely a very big deal. A spike in fuel prices have catalyzed the protest, but I think the causes of the protests are much, much deeper, and this is a reflection of the deep discontent of the people of Kazakhstan. As we know, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO, which is a Russia-led security alliance, agreed on the request by Kazakhstan president to send military assistance to allegedly help Kazakhstan to overcome this so-called terrorist threat, as they call it. It is noteworthy that throughout the existence of the organization, this is the first time that the CSTO agreed to intervene. According to the Article 4 of CSTO's charter, the member states, which are Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, are required to provide an assistance, including the military one, which when any member state is requesting aid at a time of an armed attack threatening safety, stability, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of the country. Yet, for example, in the past, the CSTO has refused to intervene in 2010, for example, during an unrest in Kyrgyzstan, and more recently in 2021, when Armenia requested its assistance during military incursions. So the Russian so-called peacekeeping troops have already arrived in Kazakhstan as part of its mission to help the president of Kazakhstan to regain control of the country. According to the Russian side, the troops would stay on the ground for as long as the president of Kazakhstan believes it necessary. The protest in Kazakhstan is definitely a huge challenge, particularly for Russia, because Kremlin now is focused on Ukraine. So now Russia will be forced to defend its interest at least on two different fronts. The timing is, I think, also very crucial and quite uncomfortable for the Kremlin as well, because the instability in Kazakhstan comes just before the US-Russia negotiations. The Russian media has already made claims that these protests are Western-oriented, Western-orchestrated, and serve the goal to repeat the colored revolution scenario. It is a well-known fact that the Kremlin sees colored revolutions as a major threat for the national security, for its national security and its sphere of influence. The Rose Revolution in 2003, for example, in Georgia, and the Orange Revolution in 2004 in Ukraine were catalysts that started to drive both countries closer to the West. So the Kremlin sees these events as anti-Russian plots. And they cannot afford to let any other country that it sees to fall within its sphere of influence to follow the path that Georgia and Ukraine went through in the early 2000s. So I think the roots of the protest are much deep, and the consequences as well are very significant for global security.
Okay, Natia, appreciate your time and your analysis there. That's Natia Saskoria, who is from University College London, looking at the situation there in Kazakhstan with those Russian troops essentially going in to prop up a Russian-backed government against protests. It is going to be a story that is going to run and has obviously got wider consequences with much talk about Russia potentially on the verge of invading Ukraine as well. Okay, it is just gone 20 minutes past 3 o'clock. You're watching GB News and The Briefing. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, Sadiq Khan versus Keir Starmer. The same political party, but a huge difference on drugs policy. We'll be debating that in just a couple of minutes. But first, here's the latest weather from the Met Office.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things turning cold again tonight. Not quite as cold as last night, but with more showers around, the potential for more disruption. There will be some snow and some icy conditions, especially first thing on Friday morning. The set of weather front's been slowly chugging across the country. The isobar's fairly close together, so it's been wet and windy for many today. We did see some snow on the higher routes across northern England and Scotland earlier, turning back to rain for a time. But as the showers come in tonight across western Scotland, western parts of Northern Ireland, northwest England, we will see further snow showers. Rain across East Anglia and the southeast this evening. That'll scoot away, and then largely clear skies here. It will feel cold if you're out tonight, but it won't be quite as cold as last night. Towns and cities hovering around freezing or a little bit above. But the roads likely to be close to or below freezing, so ice is a real risk across northern England, Northern Ireland and western Scotland on Friday morning. And the snow showers still coming in here as well, mostly over hills, but there could be a centimetre or two even at lower levels. And then we're looking at this zone of wet weather across South Wales and southwest England around the middle of the day. That could have some snow mixed in. Again, chiefly over the hills. Much of the east, dry and bright, but it's going to be cold. 3 or 4 degrees out on the wind. It feels colder than that. Through Friday evening, still a few showers around, temperatures dropping again back close to freezing, so the potential for things to be icy, and then more rain coming in for the weekend, again with some snow likely on the hills for a time over northern England and more particularly across Scotland. But again, turning back to rain, and for many, Saturday's a soggy day across England and Wales, some quite heavy bursts of rain too. Turning brighter in the west come the afternoon with a mixture of sunshine and showers. Temperatures, certainly for a time, could reach double figures across the south, but not feeling all that pleasant with the rain. And again, turning a bit chillier on Sunday. But Sunday, certainly compared to Saturday, much drier and brighter. Plenty going on with the weather at the moment.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Very welcome back to GB News and The Briefing. It is 25 minutes past 3 on TV and on the radio. Please do get in touch if you've got any issue or concern or opinion on any of today's news. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, a rift has opened up in Labour between its leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, over drugs policy. Mr Khan is trailing a scheme to decriminalise cannabis use in parts of the capital, where the Labour leaders insisted he was against softening the law when it was revealed that a proposed pilot programme would see young adults caught with Class B drugs offered kind of speeding course-style classes of counselling instead of being arrested. So what is the correct way forward for the country on drugs policy? Is it Sadiq Khan's plan or Sir Keir Starmer's crackdown? Well, here to discuss this is the co-founder and campaign group Leafy and Ripe. He is Liam O'Dowd. Liam, very good afternoon to you. Kind of set out why you reckon decriminalisation, if you like, of drugs like cannabis is a good idea.
I mean, I think, if we kind of look at the past 50 years of prohibition, the war on drugs, jokingly, many people say the war on drugs has been won by drugs. Drug use hasn't decreased thanks to prohibition. And yet, conversely, we've got the highest rate of drug deaths in Europe, in Scotland. It disproportionately affects people in deprived areas. So people who are in deprived areas are 18 more times likely to die than people in affluent areas from drug use. And, by making drugs a public health matter, we can reduce harm to the public. By educating people, we can divert people away from harmful drugs. And, this isn't kind of a policy that is based on kind of, guesses and estimations in the US and Canada, where cannabis has been decriminalised or regulated for adult use. The benefits to public health have been considerable. So tobacco use is down, violent crime is down, opiate addiction is down. In the US now, we're seeing a dramatic reduction in cannabis use in under 18s, and even things like road traffic accidents. Everyone expected road traffic accidents in Canada to increase as a result of cannabis legalization. And even the people who went to do studies and look for the data that proved that cannabis would cause more road traffic accidents published papers to admit that actually road traffic accidents go down because of education, because of it becoming a public health matter. The benefits are already out there.
How do you feel about this argument, though, that drugs are largely harmful for people? The largest killer is alcohol, and that's because it's widely available and lots of people consume it. Surely if you decriminalise this, you just incentivise people to take what is fundamentally a harmful substance.
I mean, what are we talking about as a harmful substance? I mean, there's been plenty of work done into the harms of drugs, ranging from alcohol, heroin, crack cocaine, all the way down to magic mushrooms, ketamine, MDMA. And both of those harms are, they're looked at from the perspective of not just harms to the person, but harms to society. So decriminalisation, it doesn't take away the risks. It doesn't suddenly make drugs magically better for you. But what it does is it reduces the links to violent crime. It reduces the public health benefits. It allows people to become educated and to make conscious decisions without kind of having to take unnecessary risks. So, for example, if we take cannabis as an example, at the moment, because of prohibition, people are, kind of forced to go down routes where they have to interact with people who are already breaking other crimes and committing criminal acts. They are buying products which aren't regulated. They are not given the education about what the product contains. Whereas if you bring those products into a public health domain, then you can control them. And yes, alcohol is a deadly drug, but that's because alcohol itself is far more harmful to the body. And this is not my opinion. This is, the result of countless medical studies. But as a substance used by a human being, cannabis is far less harmful than alcohol. Yet we have great access to alcohol. We can walk into a shop and buy tobacco, which is incredibly deadly. Yet if someone wants to buy cannabis and wants to make an adult informed decision, then they have to take unnecessary risks about the product that they're buying and the people that they're buying it from.
OK, Liam, appreciate your time. That's Liam O'Dad there from the campaign group Leafy and Right, clearly making the arguments for decriminalisation. GB Views at gbnews.uk. What's your view? OK, it is 3:30 on the dot. We're going to pause there. In a couple of minutes, we'll be talking about the Capitol riots 1 year on and American democracy. But first, here's the news headlines with Rosie.
Let's get you up to date. The government's sticking with plans to raise national insurance, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak saying ducking difficult decisions would not be responsible. The Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg argues the increase can't be justified as families struggle with surging food and energy costs. Well, from April, national insurance will rise by 1.25% to help fund the NHS and social care. The Prime Minister says the National Health Service is under huge pressure, but the country will get through the Omicron wave of coronavirus. Boris Johnson's comments come after 4 more hospital trusts declared themselves in a critical incident. 24 trusts now say they fear priority services cannot be delivered. The US President Joe Biden has called his predecessor Donald Trump a threat to democracy on the first anniversary of the Capitol Hill insurrection. 4 people died on the 6th of January last year, and 1 Capitol police officer died the day after defending Congress. Joe Biden said Donald Trump's web of lies about the 2020 election that drove the anger and madness of the attack have not been abated. A gay rights activist who claims he was discriminated against in a cake baking row has been told by the European Court of Human Rights that his case is inadmissible. Gareth Lee is now considering whether to bring a fresh court challenge under domestic law. He says he's frustrated that core issues weren't fairly analysed by the European Court. You are up to date at just coming up to 3:33. We'll have more for you at 4 o'clock.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing on this Thursday afternoon. It is 25 minutes to 4 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, President Joe Biden has blamed Donald Trump for the US Capitol riots as he marks the anniversary of the attack on the seat of American democracy. Investigators have so far arrested 725 suspects in connection with the attack, and the former president had planned to host a competing news conference today at his Mar-a-Lago resort home in Palm Beach, Florida, but he cancelled the event after aid reportedly warned of negative press coverage. Now, the United States remains, at this moment in time, very divided, with a staggering poll conducted by Harvard's Kennedy School Institute of Politics last autumn finding that 52% of those aged between 18 to 29 thought America's democracy was in trouble, or worse, that it was a failed democracy. Well, Joe Biden has been speaking in the last hour or so on that anniversary of the Capitol attack. Let's have a listen.
We are a great nation. My fellow Americans, in life there's truth, and tragically there are lies. Lies conceived and spread for profit and power. We must be absolutely clear about what is true and what is a lie. And here's the truth. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest, and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept he lost, even though that's what 93 United States senators, his own attorney general, his own vice president, governors and state officials in every battleground state have all said he lost. That's what 81 million of you did as you voted for a new way forward. He has done what no president in American history, the history of this country, has ever done. He refused to accept the results of an election and the will of the American people. While some courageous men and women in the Republican Party are standing against it, trying to uphold the principle of that party, too many others are transforming that party into something else. They seem no longer to want to be the party of Lincoln, Eisenhower, Reagan, the Bushes. But whatever my other disagreements are with Republicans who support the rule of law and not the rule of a single man, I will always seek to work together with them to find shared solutions where possible. Because if we have a shared belief in democracy, then anything is possible. Anything. And so at this moment, we must decide, what kind of nation are we going to be? Are we going to be a nation that accepts political violence as a norm? Are we going to be a nation where we allow partisan election officials to overturn the legally expressed will of the people? Are we going to be a nation that lives not by the light of the truth, but in the shadow of lies? We cannot allow ourselves to be that kind of nation. The way forward is to recognize the truth and to live by it.
There you go. That was the US President Joe Biden speaking a little earlier, 1 year on from those attacks on the Capitol building. Well, join me now in the studio to discuss this, I'm delighted to say, it's the American conservative journalist Andy Ngo. Andy, very good afternoon to you. I mean, first of all, it is incredible that it was a year ago since that horrific attack on Congress. We've had many investigations. I think there's a congressional investigation taking place at the moment. How much did that help, that attack, to undermine American democracy?
Well, it was described and continues to be described in the liberal establishment press as an insurrection. But if you look at the charges against the suspects, none of them have actually been charged with insurrection, which is a federal crime. And that should tell you what you need to know.
What was it then if it wasn't an insurrection?
It was a riot.
A riot.
Criminal activity.
Yep.
There are many falsehoods that, I mean, what happened that day was horrible and a disgrace to America. But it wasn't an insurrection, and treating it, I think, as how the Democrat establishment call it, the darkest day in America. I think that's treating it as like a partisan political something to just sort of kick around. And you can see bits of that in the speech that the president just said. Many falsehoods continue to be repeated about it. The number of people who died, there were 5 people who died. The only homicide out of the 5 is that of Ashley Babbitt, who was shot as she was climbing through the window by an officer. The other 1 died of a drug overdose, and 3 others died of unrelated health issues. So a lot of the narrative around it did end up falling apart.
But fundamentally, the narrative that seems to have led to this awful day, as you would agree, seems to be President Trump's repeated attempts to claim that this election wasn't won, which, you know, as President Biden's pointed out, I mean, he is, after all, in the White House, have been proven time and time again to be wrong. And fundamentally, very few people, even within the Republican establishment, seem to think that President Trump actually won.
Yeah, well, certainly I don't. I'm not here to defend any allegations and claims that the 2020 election was stolen. But I think what the public needs to remember that who started this game was the Democrat establishment. Back in 2016, immediately after Trump had was announced to be the winner, the response wasn't just that the election was stolen because of a collusion with a foreign entity, Russia. I mean, there was evidence that was faked. I'm referring to the Steele dossier that was funded in part by the Hillary Clinton campaign. And where I'm from, Portland, Oregon, thousands, more than 10,000 people responded to reject the election results by engaging in political violence and carried that out for 4 years, and that was excused. And in the 6 months leading up to the 6th of January last year, there were deadly political violence that was being carried out by people ostensibly on the left and the far left, doing it in the name of Black Lives Matter and anti-racism and anti-fascism. So
you seem to be suggesting both sides are as bad as each other.
I don't think it really matters who's worse than who. What I'm just saying is that if the position is that political violence is wrong, which that is a position that our political leadership needs to take, then you can't ignore the months of deadly unrest that was carried out in America.
But there is a difference here in the sense that, you know, when President Trump stood up and said we need to fight like hell and there needs to be a strong response in front of a crowd that then went on to storm the Capitol building in a riot, that as the President of the United States, he has to take some form of responsibility for that. He's the leader of the country. But, I mean, more so than almost anyone else.
I agree. At the same time, I also believe that before the trial against Derek Chauvin had even started, there were Democratic politicians who described George Floyd's death as a murder when that evidence wasn't presented yet as a trial, and that incited violence as well. So
let's look at American democracy. You know, clearly there is real concern that we could see more stuff like we're seeing now on screen that is of the attack on the Capitol building. How likely do you think that is?
I mean, it was an attack on democracy insofar that of the location, right? This is where Congress is. But when I look at what happened that day and just compare that, it was a riot and an attack on federal U.S. property. Where I'm from, in Portland, Oregon, for an entire month in July of 2020, every night there were thousands of people who were attempting to burn down U.S. federal property, U.S. federal courthouse. And that was excused by the local elected government, as well as many politicians at the national level who told Trump to remove the federal officers who were sent to protect that property. So a lot of this, to me, seems, again, just like a political football and a partisan game. And
in many regards, what I'm trying to get at is that, frankly, we talk an awful lot less on this side of the pond about American politics than we did when President Trump was in office. You're right in pointing out there was a hell of a lot of violence on lots of sides in lots of states in the United States over the last year. That seems to have dissipated somewhat since President Trump has left the White House. I suppose my question is, if he was to run again, would that genuinely aid American democracy, or does it potentially stoke up some of those divisions that we saw play out during his term of office?
Well, given that he's still refused to, I mean, his legacy, I think, is that of ignominy, in that he's continued to reject the legitimacy of the last election, and many Americans feel that way. I think if he was to re-enter politics again, that would be polarizing for America. At the same time, Democrats haven't done anything to unite the country as they promised to do when Biden was running as a candidate.
And just very finally, many people outside of the United States, but inside as well, feel that this plays into the hands of Moscow and Beijing, this great eternal division in the United States. Is that something that you share?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a divided America domestically is a weakened America. And you can see that, I mean, we're being attacked, culturally, socially, politically, and the whole world order is being shifting. And a weakened American democracy means democracy is weakened, therefore, around the rest of the world.
Okay. Andy, appreciate your time. Andy, no.
My pleasure.
From Portland, Oregon, but here in the United Kingdom, joining us in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, let's get a different perspective on all of this. We're joined now by Imran Ahmed, who is the Chief Executive of the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, and joins us down the line. Very good afternoon to you, Imran. Just first of all, we didn't really explore it there, but clearly a lot of people place part of the blame at what happened last year on social media companies and their role in potentially perpetuating some falsehoods around the election in 2020. What's your sense of what companies like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and others may well have played in that?
Well, I mean, here's what we know. Facebook's business model maximizes radicalization. It increases the volume. It gives a megaphone to hate and misinformation. We know that from the revelations from within Facebook brought forward by the brave whistleblower Frances Haugen. And they do that because it's profitable for them, that angry people who are engaged on the platforms equals eyeballs, which equals ad revenue, and 98% of their revenues come from ads. And we know that they played a part. In short, they turned the dial up to 11 and, to mix metaphors, they blew the bloody doors off. And they've done that both when it comes to the pandemic, when it comes to anti-vax misinformation, which has led to so many people taking catastrophic decisions for their own health and for our national security, our national health security. But also when it came to election misinformation, which flowed, by the way, all the way through from 2016. Let's not forget, there were lies being told about election manipulation in 2016. If you remember, President Trump said in 2016 that he would have won the popular vote if it wasn't for the fact that there'd been election fraud. And he carried that through for years and years. We knew in advance, in November the 14th, there were violent clashes with the police and far-right demonstrators on the streets of Washington, D.C. So January the 6th came as no surprise to anyone. And for all I thought it was really depressing, the last interview with the Canadian journalist that you had on. Because, what it misses is that on January the 6th, Donald Trump spoke at the rally. There was a rally that was organized by the architecture that he's put into place to promote the big lie that the election was stolen. It was by the people, the Stop the Steal coordinators, who are known to him, who are friends of him, who are coordinating together at the Willard Hotel down the road from me in Washington, D.C. And so it seems quite remarkable that given all that evidence, he instead is reaching for a conspiracy theory, a theory of his, that in fact the whole thing was a lie, that it was far left protesters who were doing it, and that the courts, Congress, the majority of the Republicans and the media are all complicit in a massive lie to cover up the fact that it was Antifa what did it to the Capitol rather than the people that we saw doing it.
I'm just going to interrupt you there because I must say, Andy's not here now, and he didn't actually say that on this programme. He has said it in the past, but he hasn't said it on this programme. So we should point that out. Let's move away about the rhetoric around what happened. There are clearly people who believe a certain version of events and others who believe others. The big fundamental point is that you've got these two silos, it seems, from the outside of American public opinion, deeply divided. How does that get reconciled?
Well, the first thing is we've got to stop the dial being turned up to 11, and we're going to have to dial it back. And that's a mix of things that have to happen. First of all, I think that the US is going to need some sort of truth and reconciliation process. And whether that can be executed through Congress, through the normal political process, or it's going to require more than just that, require President Biden, for example, and Republicans who are willing to engage in a rational conversation based on objective facts, are able to come together. And I believe that to be true. Look, I was in Congress giving evidence to the House committee a few weeks ago. It is remarkable how aligned both sides are on most of the issues that most Americans care about. But actually, it's the perceptions of division that have been amplified. And in part, look, that election came at the end of a year where we were all separated from each other. We were all under lockdowns all over the world and in the United States. And of course, the information that we were getting was being interpreted through the lens of algorithms, for the main part, through social media. And I think that that has a significant part to play. We saw what happens in an information ecosystem, a world in which information is ordered not by, water cooler conversations, the normal social interactions by which we form our values and our social mores, our attitudes, our behaviors, our understandings of society around us, but instead through the algorithms of social media platforms. And guess what? That world is one that most of us don't really want to live in. It's a terrible place where there's anger, frustration, and violence all around.
And Imran, just finally, moving away from what happened last year to what is happening today, the mumbo jumbo, I think, as Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, described it, when it comes to disinformation around vaccines, having to go with anti-vaxxers today. There is going to be an online harms bill introduced in Parliament here in an attempt to try and address some of the kind of fake news or misinformation that you see online. Where are we at in terms of regulation of some of the big social media companies when it comes to Congress in the United States?
Well, in Congress at the moment, the problem is that there's about 50, 60 different bills, and there are other initiatives like antitrust initiatives which would break up monopolies, all in play, but there is no leadership. And, I've been critical of the White House, saying that it needs to set the terms. It needs to say, look, this is what we expect to see, to try to cohere all the different initiatives. The UK is in a different place. And, all credit to Her Majesty's government. And I've been working with them and also with the select committee that was scrutinising the bill. I was the first witness to give evidence on that in September. And I think this bill is a substantial and wide-ranging, comprehensive attempt to try to regulate the internet, social media in particular, which we know is creating all these harms in different ways, whether it's privacy or it's security or it is national security and our individual health. And the impact of disinformation and the rampant flow of hate that we saw, for example, around around football last year. And I think that the government is trying to make an honest attempt to regulate fully. There are things it could improve, but we're yet to see the final legislation in March, and we look forward to it.
Appreciate it. That's Imran Ahmed, who's the Chief Executive of the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, joining us from Washington, D.C. Lots of you get in touch, GBnews at gbnews.uk, particularly about that anniversary. John says it's nice to see some dignity back in the White House. That was a great speech and showed how dangerous Trump was. Lewis says, why do we keep disregarding the fact that Trump stated peacefully in his January 6th speech? And James says that Trump needs to accept that Biden won the presidency in 2020. It's beyond petty to continue with this rhetoric unless he sorts his act out. He has no chance in 2024. OK, well, that is it from me for the briefing for today. Don't forget, Arlene Foster is in the seat tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I'll be back on Monday at 3 in the afternoon. Tom Harwood is here at 9 in the morning. Up next, though, it's Colin Brazier with Brazier between 4 and 6. But that's it from me. Have a nice weekend. Up next, it's the weather from the Met Office.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things turning cold again tonight. Not quite as cold as last night, but with more showers around, the potential for more disruption. There will be some snow and some icy conditions, especially first thing on Friday morning. The set of weather front's been slowly chugging across the country. The isobar's fairly close together, so it's been wet and windy for many today.